Hey guys, tonight we step into the dimly lit corridors of ancient palaces, where shadows stretch longer than the daylight dares to reach. You wander silently, imagining the flicker of torchlight dancing on stone walls, every echo a potential warning or a trap. It's the world of whispers, hushed steps, and unseen eyes, where someone might be plotting just behind the tapestry. And yes, you probably won't survive this if you get caught in the wrong corridor at the wrong hour. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's kind of fun imagining where in the world you're sneaking through shadows with me. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You creep down a hallway, your bare feet silent against the cold stone floor. The air is thick with the smell of smoke from distant torches and the faint scent of waxed wood from the royal chambers. You brush against tapestries depicting triumphs of kings and queens, battles, ceremonies, and the occasional feast. But the victories painted here mean little in the silent game that unfolds at night. Behind each embroidered figure, someone could be hiding, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Scholars still argue whether assassins were primarily trained professionals or opportunistic insiders, but evidence suggests early guild-like structures existed. You can almost imagine a hidden staircase behind the bookcase, leading to a secret chamber where novices are learning the art of silence. In one corner, a young apprentice practices slipping a dagger from its sheath without the slightest sound, while in another, and the air is tense, and yet, strangely, almost ritualistic. Every step you take echoes slightly, and your mind begins to race. The corridors aren't merely pathways, they're stages for deception, arenas for the psychological game of predator and prey. Ancient palaces often had more corridors than residents. Labyrinthine layouts ensured that even royalty were vulnerable. And yet, the assassins thrived in such complexity, moving with practiced ease where nobles stumbled and servants gossiped unknowingly. Oddly, some of these killers were reputed to carry small charms or talismans, as if luck or superstition could aid in perfect timing. You notice a faint glimmer of metallic reflection, someone ahead adjusting their wrist dagger, perhaps checking alignment with a guard shift. The knowledge of these assassins' existence alone sent chills down the spines of rulers. Some assassins reportedly practiced stalking their master's pets or servants first, testing patience and timing before attempting something larger. It seems almost ceremonial, a mix of method and superstition intertwined with deadly intent. Scholars still argue whether ritualistic training or pragmatic trial and error dominated early assassin education. But either way, mastery was essential. Even the smallest detail in the palace mattered. The angle of a torch, the alignment of a door, the predictable footsteps of a sentry. These were studied, memorized, and exploited. And as you continue your silent passage, the grand tapestries loom overhead. Faces of kings, painted in vibrant indigo and russet, staring blankly, unaware that a shadow might just move between them. One misstep could mean discovery. One perfect step could solidify an assassin's reputation for years to come. And so tonight, as we wander through these corridors together, you're stepping into a world both terrifying and mesmerizing. A world where silence is power and patience is a weapon more deadly than any sword. Remember, even in a room bustling with life and ceremony, the quietest presence could hold the fate of kings in their hands. You follow the faint scent of oil lamps and wet stone deeper into the palace. where the corridors widen into grand halls draped in tapestries depicting both triumphs and tragedies. The air feels heavier here, thick with the whispers of servants and the subtle tension of guards who never fully relax. You notice a table laid with ink and scrolls, maps of distant lands, and plans for campaigns you'll never witness firsthand. Yet the faint metallic glint in the corner hints at the silent games being played in these very spaces. The political intrigue of ancient civilizations wasn't always waged with armies. Sometimes it relied on far subtler instruments, persuasion, seduction, and calculated alliances that could shift the balance of power overnight. Scholars still argue whether certain royal advisors actively encouraged sexual manipulation to control nobles, but records suggest it was far from uncommon. You imagine a chamber where courtiers, cloaked in indigo and russet, whisper and scheme, learning the unspoken rules of survival, how beauty, favor, and influence could be wielded as deftly as a blade. A flickering lantern casts long shadows across the room, and you notice a young scribe diligently copying down instructions, unaware that the pages they handle might dictate life or death for those at court. A sudden creak of the floorboards reminds you that even silent observers are part of the theater. The walls are adorned with gilded flourishes, yet each engraving serves a dual purpose: art and deception. Hidden alcoves and secret passages allow spies to eavesdrop without ever being seen. You peer into one of these niches and imagine someone, heart-pounding, learning the intimate routines of a king or queen, the timing of private meetings, the comings and goings of favored courtiers, the subtle manipulations that ensured loyalty or enforced obedience. You notice a faint shimmer of silk, perhaps the attire of a royal favorite, moving swiftly between doors. In many ancient courts, sexual alliances were both strategic and dangerous. Servants and concubines, scholars argue, weren't merely companions. They were instruments of influence, trained, whether willingly or not, to gather intelligence, sway decisions, and solidify loyalties. It's unsettling to realize that even affection could be weaponized, and that trust was a fragile commodity, easily exploited by those who understood the subtle power of desire. As you continue, the flicker of candlelight reveals opulent furniture carved with intricate patterns. Yet the most important details are subtle. The placement of a chair, the angle of a table, the arrangement of doors, all calculated to control access, visibility, and interaction. You imagine a royal advisor sitting quietly in the shadows, observing interactions and whispering instructions through servants. Here, even the most trivial act, a glance, a smile, or a gesture, could tip the scales of influence. Oddly, some records suggest charms or talismans were worn by courtiers to enhance attractiveness or protect favor, blending superstition with political strategy. In one corner, a small group gathers around a table, scattered with goblets of wine, parchment, and fragrant oils. The discussion is hushed, deliberate, filled with codes and insinuations. Scholars still debate how much of this was formalized training versus improvisation, yet the impact on political dynamics is undeniable. You watch, as if invisible, and see how the mere presence of a carefully positioned companion can alter negotiations, temper conflicts, or sway decisions, all without a single sword drawn. The air grows cooler as you pass near open windows, where the faint scent of the palace gardens drifts in, mingling with candle smoke. You notice the soft rustle of silk skirts and the quiet shuffle of slippers, and it's clear that even the seemingly mundane meals, promenades, music, could serve as stages for manipulation. Those who mastered these social dynamics wielded a quiet, lethal power, often overshadowing generals and ministers in influence. Every movement is measured, every word chosen, every favor a calculated step on the invisible chessboard of power. As you reach the far end of the hall, you glimpse a gilded doorway leading to the private chambers of a ruler. Here the stakes are highest. Every choice, every gesture, every personal alliance can echo across the court, affecting everything from succession to war. You understand that in these chambers, seduction was more than intimacy. It was currency, intelligence, and control wrapped in velvet and whispered promises. And as you step back into the corridor, you feel the weight of centuries of carefully orchestrated strategies, all revolving around the delicate interplay of desire and authority. The palace breathes around you, alive with silent plotting, unseen gazes, and unspoken rules. And you realize that navigating these spaces requires not just courage, but an acute awareness of the subtle, intimate levers of power, where trust, affection, and cunning intertwine into a tapestry of influence that could decide empires. You follow a narrow, dimly lit staircase down toward the servants' quarters, the smell of wax and dust mixing with the faint tang of the sea air wafting through open windows. The corridor opens onto a bustling hub where attendants, acolytes, and concubines move with quiet purpose, each performing tasks that seem mundane, yet are anything but ordinary. Here, every whispered instruction, every touch, every glance is laden with meaning. You observe a young attendant adjusting the folds of a richly colored robe on a visiting diplomat's companion, her eyes darting nervously, yet every move is precise, rehearsed, a blend of obedience and subtle influence. Scholars still argue whether these practices were systematically taught or passed down informally. Yet the evidence shows that sexual awareness and strategic allure were essential tools in ancient courts. A flickering lantern casts elongated shadows across worn wooden floors, revealing a tapestry depicting a past victory where political alliances were cemented not with treaties alone, but through carefully orchestrated unions. You sense that the attendants and courtiers have long since mastered the choreography of courtly influence. Even a casual conversation over tea or wine might hide layers of information gathering or persuasion. You notice a servant discreetly signaling another with a subtle hand gesture, a silent conversation unfolding behind the semblance of idle activity. In one corner, a young scribe leans over a low table, copying down observations in meticulous script. The ink glimmers slightly under the lantern light, a reminder that records of these intimate maneuvers were often preserved, though selectively. Some details appear exaggerated, others understated, leaving historians debating which accounts reflect actual strategy and which drift into rumor. Oddly, you spot a small charm tucked into the scribe's sleeve, reputedly worn to enhance attentiveness and attract the favor of superiors, a quirky blend of superstition and tactical thinking. Your attention is drawn to a window where moonlight filters through ornate latticework, illuminating a scene of quiet seduction. A favored companion of the ruler walks gracefully along the corridor, her presence commanding attention and subtly shaping the behavior of those around her. You realize that influence was rarely about force. It was about anticipation, perception, and the ability to inspire desire without direct confrontation. This interplay of subtle control extended to dining rooms, libraries, and even prayer chambers, turning the mundane into instruments of political maneuvering. As you continue, you pass a small chamber where confidential meetings take place. You catch glimpses of courtiers leaning close, speaking in hushed tones, their expressions carefully controlled. Scholars still debate whether certain favorites were more advisors than companions, but the outcomes of their whispered suggestions often swayed critical decisions. Every step you take in this labyrinth of influence reminds you that proximity, timing, and charm could eclipse even the most formal decrees or battle plans. The servants' quarters themselves are a microcosm of strategy. Laundry rooms, kitchens, and sleeping areas are interwoven with secrets, overheard conversations, carefully delivered messages, and the subtle monitoring of behaviors. You notice how a simple exchange of garments or an adjustment of a pillow can carry hidden meaning, signaling favor or disfavor to those who understand the unspoken codes. Even scent and color play roles. Teal silk for calm, saffron accents for attention, russet for loyalty. Each choice is deliberate, a silent tool for controlling perception. Moving past the central hearth, you glimpse a young performer practicing dance steps for an upcoming audience with the ruler. Their every motion is meant to please and influence, blending entertainment with strategic positioning. You feel the tension between freedom and obligation, each smile, each gesture a potential lever of power. Historians still debate how much of this was coerced versus voluntary, but it's evident that influence often required performance, blending intimacy and political acumen into a single act. Finally, you approach a doorway where the ruler's private consultations occur. Here, the stakes are heightened. Counsel given in these rooms could alter succession plans, territorial disputes, or alliances. Sexual favor and intimate knowledge often became instruments, whether overt or subtle, in shaping the decisions made within these walls. You recognize that in this world, survival depended on understanding human desires, anticipating reactions, and wielding influence without leaving obvious traces. As you step back, observing the flowing silk, glimmering ornaments, and quiet but deliberate movements of those around you, it becomes clear that control in these ancient civilizations was as much about human psychology as military might. Desire, trust, and perception are the silent currencies that have shaped history just as profoundly as swords or scrolls. Every glance, every gesture, every whispered word is a thread in the intricate tapestry of political power. You enter the opulent audience hall, where sunlight streams through high windows, gilding every carved column and embroidered tapestry. The ruler sits elevated on a throne draped in deep indigo and saffron fabrics, a living focal point of authority. Around them, courtiers cluster in careful formations, each aware of their own position and the subtle ways to advance influence. Even the arrangement of seating is strategic. Proximity to the throne can signify favor, while distance can be a silent reprimand. Scholars still argue whether these hierarchical cues were formalized or evolved organically. Yet your gaze lands on a young attendant bringing in trays of delicacies, sweet pastries, spiced wines, and preserved fruits. Each offering is designed not merely for sustenance, but to create an ambiance of intimacy and distraction. You notice how courtiers lean slightly toward those with power, their movements synchronized with the ruler's gaze, as if orchestrated by unseen hands. The room hums with quiet conversations and glances that carry far more weight than the spoken words. Oddly, a subtle aroma of incense and perfumed oils lingers, deliberately chosen to evoke trust, relaxation, or attraction, blending physical and psychological influence seamlessly. A small group near a corner performs a ritualized greeting, bowing and presenting gifts that are themselves symbolic. A rare gemstone, an intricately embroidered garment, a delicate scroll of poetry. Each gift carries political meaning, hinting at loyalty, capability, or ambition. You notice a courtier brushing a lock of hair behind their ear, a seemingly trivial gesture, yet loaded with suggestion, reflecting the calculated use of charm as a lever of persuasion. Scholars still debate whether certain courtiers were trained from youth in these subtleties, or if they relied on innate intuition. But the outcomes suggest skill was often rewarded with real power. A musician begins a haunting melody on a lyre, and you feel the room subtly shift. Conversation drops slightly, heads tilt in unison, and even the ruler's eyes soften. Music, you realize, is another instrument of political control, capable of guiding moods, tempering tensions, and highlighting favored individuals. Nearby, a favorite companion of the ruler exchanges a knowing glance with an aide. Their silent communication, shaping decisions behind the scenes. Every move seems choreographed, blending artistry, desire, and strategy into a single, fluid performance. As you wander closer to the throne, you notice the attire of each attendee carefully chosen. Deep indigo signals loyalty, saffron indicates ambition, russet embodies humility, and teal evokes calmness or approachability. Even the smallest accessory, a pendant, a ring, a sash, is deliberately selected to convey intention. Scholars still argue whether these color codes were universally recognized or varied by region and court, but their visual impact on perception is undeniable. You see the subtle interplay. A well-timed bow, a lingering gaze, a carefully modulated tone, all reinforcing the web of control. At one end of the hall, a council of advisors whispers discreetly, influencing the ruler's perspective without overtly challenging authority. The hierarchy is maintained, yet power flows through these subtle channels, through favor, through attraction, through the perception of loyalty or usefulness. A scribe quietly documents events, aware that even these seemingly mundane records will later influence succession, treaties, or historical reputation. Oddly, you notice a small charm tucked beneath the scribe's robes, perhaps for protection or attentiveness. Another reminder of how superstition intertwined with politics. You glance at a balcony above, where sentries and guards keep watch, their presence a dual statement of security and subtle intimidation. Even the act of being observed affects behavior. Courtiers straighten, smiles are calibrated, gestures measured. You realize that the physical arrangement of space itself becomes a tool, reinforcing hierarchy, control, and perception. Influence is embedded in architecture, movement, and proximity as much as in words or gestures. Toward the center of the hall, the ruler engages in a brief but revealing conversation with a visiting dignitary. You watch as subtle touches, the way hands are offered, the slight bow of the head, and the timing of laughter, all convey layered messages. Scholars still debate whether these nuances were consciously taught or naturally acquired, but their power is evident. Entire alliances and political decisions could hinge on these delicate interactions. As you step back to absorb the scene, the complexity becomes clear. Every element, the clothing, the positioning, the gifts, the music, the gestures, even scents, works together as a sophisticated system of influence. Sexual awareness and controlled intimacy, carefully choreographed, act as silent instruments of persuasion. In these ancient halls, survival, ambition, and power were woven into the very fabric of human interaction. blending desire with strategy in ways that shape the course of history. You find yourself in the ruler's private chambers, a space suffused with warm candlelight that dances across richly colored tapestries. The air carries a mixture of incense and the faint perfume of blossoms, deliberately chosen to create a calming yet subtly enticing atmosphere. Here, the rules of public decorum relax, and influence is wielded in quieter, more intimate forms. Scholars still argue whether these private interactions were formalized as political tools or evolved naturally within courtly culture, but their impact on decisions is unmistakable. A favored companion approaches, draped in luxurious fabrics of indigo and russet, their steps measured to suggest deference yet allure. Each gesture seems intentional, the tilt of a head, the glimmer of a jewel, the subtle reveal of a wrist, sending silent signals understood by the initiated. You notice how even seating arrangements on plush cushions or low divans carry meaning. Proximity denotes favor. Distance implies caution or subtle disapproval. Courtiers trained in these arts navigate the balance between admiration and manipulation, understanding that power often flows through charm and perception, as much as through titles or decrees. On a low table, trays of delicacies are carefully arranged, spiced fruits, honeyed pastries, and rare delicacies imported from distant lands. You realize these offerings serve dual purposes: nourishment and strategic distraction, food, scent, and presentation combine to create a multi-sensory environment that influences mood, encourages trust, and can even soften the ruler's judgment. Oddly, a small vial of rosewater rests nearby, its intended use unclear, yet you sense its role in crafting an experience that blends pleasure with subtle persuasion. A musician softly strums a lyre, and the gentle melody threads through the conversation, affecting both listener and speaker alike. Even the rhythm of sound is a tool. Scholars still debate how intentionally music was deployed to influence decisions or highlight favored individuals. You watch the companion lean slightly closer, sharing a whispered comment, their eyes conveying meaning layered with suggestion. An unspoken interplay that could affect alliances, appointments, or policy choices. The chamber itself is a theater of control. Rich fabrics drape the walls. Gold inlaid patterns reflect flickering candlelight, and ornamental mirrors create subtle reflections that multiply the presence of both host and guest. Every element, from the arrangement of cushions to the placement of a small fountain, contributes to a sense of power and intimacy. You notice how even the smallest accessories, rings, bracelets, combs, and embroidered sashes, signal status, loyalty, or intent, their visual cues understood without words. A quiet exchange of gifts occurs: a jeweled brooch, a delicate embroidered scarf, a small scroll of poetry. Each carries political weight, symbolizing trust, admiration, or indebtedness. You see the nuanced choreography of giving and receiving, where each hand movement, bow, or smile conveys information more potent than any spoken decree. The companion subtly adjusts their posture to mirror the ruler's, fostering a sense of alignment and loyalty, while the ruler's attentive gaze confirms favor, illustrating how attraction and personal rapport intertwine with governance. Near a side alcove, a scribe records the meeting, aware that even private interactions will later influence historical accounts or succession narratives. Oddly, you notice a charm tucked discreetly among their papers, perhaps meant to safeguard accuracy or influence outcomes subtly. another example of how superstition, ritual, and strategy coexist. A chamber's warmth, scent, sound, and visual richness all function as instruments of influence, demonstrating how intimacy and calculated allure operate as forms of political power. As the conversation concludes, you sense the subtle power shifts. A hand lingering a moment too long, a glance exchanged, a soft laugh timed perfectly. Scholars still argue whether such gestures were consciously rehearsed or naturally evolved, but their efficacy is clear. Alliances are formed, decisions swayed, and loyalty reinforced. You recognize that in these private chambers, the interplay of desire, perception, and strategy can have consequences as significant as any battlefield victory or legal decree. Stepping back to observe the scene as a whole, you see the complex network of influence, visual cues, scent, music, touch, and positioning, all meticulously orchestrated. Survival and power are not merely about force or inheritance. They are embedded in nuanced social rituals where personal charm and controlled intimacy can determine fate. In this carefully staged environment, the political use of sexuality emerges as both an art and a strategy, weaving human behavior into the very machinery of governance. You follow the court's inner corridors, dimly lit with flickering torches that cast elongated shadows on the stone walls, each step echoing faintly in the vast, quiet space. The atmosphere is intentionally charged with tension, yet softened with subtle luxuries. Tapestries depicting heroic ancestors, faint scents of myrrh lingering in the air, and carefully placed cushions along the walls for rest or discreet meetings. Scholars still argue whether these passages were purely functional or designed to psychologically influence those who traverse them. But you can't help noticing the effect. The corridors themselves are instruments of control. A group of attendants, cloaked in deep indigo and saffron, moves silently alongside you, their presence a mixture of service and subtle intimidation. Each carries trays of exotic fruits, sweetmeats, or perfumed oils, their gestures precise, almost ritualistic, as though performing an unspoken choreography. You notice the way their eyes flick toward your movements, assessing reactions, interpreting subtle cues, and perhaps reporting these impressions to those in power. Even in the shadows, observation is a tool of governance. Nothing escapes unnoticed. Through a narrow archway, you glimpse a private study where advisors engage with a ruler, quills moving over parchment, while hushed conversations float in the candlelit air. The interplay between intellect and attraction is palpable. Scholars and confidants are carefully positioned, their physical proximity subtly reinforcing influence and hierarchy. Oddly, a small carved figurine sits on a side table, rumored to serve as a talisman for loyalty or persuasion, demonstrating how superstition and strategy coexist in everyday governance. You notice how the corridors themselves direct movement, subtly channeling who encounters whom, who overhears conversations, and which doors remain closed to prying eyes. Every design choice, arches, alcoves, staircases, and hidden passages, serves dual purposes: practicality and psychological impact. Even the materials of the walls, the texture of the floors, and the placement of torch sconces are part of an intricate network of influence. Scholars still debate how consciously these elements were orchestrated, but their effect on power dynamics is undeniable. A pair of attendants pauses near a corner to exchange whispered news, their words inaudible, but body language conveying urgency. You see the delicate balance of access and secrecy. Who is allowed to speak, where, and when. Such controlled exposure reinforces the ruler's authority, subtly shaping courtly politics through information as much as through direct command. The corridors themselves feel alive, a theater of strategy where observation, secrecy, and intimacy converge. Further along, a narrow balcony opens to a moonlit courtyard. You glimpse the soft reflection of lanterns on cobblestones and the distant silhouette of a ceremonial garden. Here, political and personal intrigue merge, secret meetings, whispered alliances, and discreet exchanges occur beneath the cover of night. The sensory experience, cool breeze, gentle rustling of leaves, glimmering lights, heightens the intensity of human interactions. You sense that attraction, observation, and subtle persuasion operate as instruments of control in ways as deliberate as military tactics or legislative maneuvers. Finally, you notice a small study alcove tucked away behind a heavy curtain. An advisor and companion sit there, leaning close, sharing documents while exchanging glances filled with unspoken meaning. Each gesture, touching a hand briefly, tilting a head, whispering words, carries layers of political and emotional significance. Scholars still argue whether these intimate interactions were conscious strategies or natural outcomes of human ambition, yet their impact resonates throughout the court. Stepping back to observe the entire corridor network, you see the elegance and cunning in its design. Controlled visibility, directed movement, and opportunities for both oversight and subtle influence. Even the mundane, footsteps, whispers, and shadows, participates in the orchestration of power. Survival within this environment demands keen perception, an understanding of human desire, and an awareness that every corridor can be both a conduit and a trap. You realize that the architecture itself is a silent participant in political strategy, reinforcing the profound intersection of space, psychology, and control. You are ushered into a lavish chamber where the ruler receives favored courtiers, the air thick with the scent of incense and honeyed wine. Light from tall gilded candelabras dances across the mosaic floors, creating an interplay of shadow and color that seems almost alive. You notice the deliberate arrangement, cushions and low divans positioned to guide proximity, to dictate who sits near the ruler and who lingers at the periphery. Scholars still argue whether these seating arrangements were purely ceremonial or subtly manipulative, but the effect is immediate. Power, intimacy, and observation coexist in one carefully choreographed space. A musician plucks delicate notes on a lyre, the sound curling around the chamber like a hypnotic thread. You observe how the music influences mood, softening attentions, encouraging openness, or subtly favoring certain attendees. It is not merely entertainment. It is a strategic tool, a sensory extension of political influence. Attendants in teal and indigo tunics quietly refill goblets and adjust cushions, their movements rehearsed to maintain the perfect balance between service and discretion. Oddly, a small bronze mirror rests on a side table, reflecting candlelight in unexpected directions, perhaps a practical tool, perhaps a symbolic reminder of self-awareness, surveillance, or allure. You notice how gestures and glances carry weight. Courtiers shift in response to a tilt of the head, a raised eyebrow, or a fleeting smile. Political alliances are reinforced, rivalries subtly communicated, and loyalty signaled without a single word spoken aloud. Even a casual touch of the hand across a table, a lean closer to speak privately, or a shared laugh operates within this delicate web of influence. Scholars still debate the extent to which these nuanced interactions were consciously leveraged for control versus naturally occurring expressions of ambition, desire, and strategy. The chamber's architecture subtly enforces hierarchy. Tall windows frame the night sky, letting in moonlight that illuminates select figures while others remain in relative shadow. Archways and alcoves control sightlines, determining who can witness which interactions. The low ceiling over a particular corner draws intimacy for secretive conversations, while the central area remains exposed, a stage for those seeking favor. Even the colors of tapestries and cushions, deep russet, rich saffron, muted indigo, contribute to the psychology of space, signaling status and shaping perception. A small group of envoys gathers near a corner, whispering over folded documents, their expressions careful, calculating. You see how information is currency. Who hears what, when, and how often directly impacts influence and opportunity. Even subtle laughter or a momentary display of discomfort can alter the trajectory of alliances. Attentive observation is critical. The unspoken nuances of posture, tone, and eye contact carry more weight than any formal decree. You notice that interactions are layered. Some courtiers engage openly in conversation, while others linger silently, observing reactions, measuring the room. Every movement, no matter how small, is noted, sometimes by those in attendance, sometimes by strategically positioned mirrors or reflective surfaces that extend the ruler's gaze beyond physical presence. Scholars still argue about how much of this orchestration was conscious manipulation versus natural courtly etiquette. Yet, you sense the deliberate intertwining of desire, power, and surveillance. At the far end of the chamber, a favored companion leans close to the ruler, sharing information with a hushed voice and a fleeting touch of the hand. Each gesture is imbued with layered meaning: trust, persuasion, attraction, or subtle warning. You feel the electric tension in the room as proximity, access, and favor operate as instruments of political control as much as written laws or armed might. As you step back, taking in the scene as a whole, you see that this chamber is more than a room. It is a living stage where every light, shadow, gesture, and sound is orchestrated to guide perception, influence decisions, and reinforce hierarchy. Survival and success here require attentiveness, sensitivity to subtle signals, and an understanding that even the smallest interaction can shift power dynamics. Every glance, whisper, and arrangement is part of a complex symphony of control, where influence is wielded as much through intimacy and observation as through overt command. You find yourself in the private quarters of a powerful ruler, where opulence and secrecy intertwine like threads in a rich tapestry. The walls are draped with deep crimson and gold textiles, embroidered with intricate patterns depicting past victories and divine symbols. The scent of exotic oils and incense hangs thick in the air, curling around the flickering light of bronze lanterns. Scholars still argue whether these fragrances were meant purely for luxury or served as subtle tools to influence mood, alertness, and perception. You notice how the interplay of light, scent, and color creates an environment designed to command attention and loyalty. A low, plush divan rests near a carved wooden screen, where favored attendants lounge, awaiting instructions or the chance to observe interactions. You notice a carefully arranged set of cushions, each color and placement denoting rank, favor, and opportunity for influence. Those in the deepest indigo are closest to the ruler's ear, literally and figuratively, while saffron and russet hues mark secondary tiers, signaling the hierarchy of attention and access. An odd detail catches your eye: a small, gilded hand mirror resting near a brazier, reflecting light across the chamber in a way that allows discreet observation without being obvious. You see the ruler receiving confidants and allies, each approach choreographed to project intimacy and control. A brush of a hand, a lean forward to whisper, a tilt of the head. These seemingly small gestures communicate approval, secrecy, or caution. The chamber itself enforces a dance of political and sensual influence. Archways frame figures entering or leaving, while low alcoves and niches create semi-private spaces where whispered conversations hold immense weight. Even the placement of a single goblet or a folded document can signal attention or neglect. As you watch, a favored companion engages the ruler in soft conversation, fingers grazing the edge of a tapestry. Every movement is measured, every word a calculated opportunity. Scholars still debate whether these encounters were consciously manipulative or simply extensions of natural social and sexual dynamics, but the effect is unmistakable. Power, desire, and political influence are deeply intertwined. The chamber's acoustics amplify whispers, while the rustle of silk and the gentle clink of a goblet punctuate moments of tension or humor. You notice that music plays a subtle role. A lyre in a corner produces soft, repetitive notes that guide mood and encourage receptiveness. The rhythm of sound seems to harmonize with movement and gesture, creating a multi-sensory orchestration of influence. Even the positioning of attendants, some hidden behind carved screens, some openly near the ruler, is a deliberate play of visibility and secrecy. A casual observer might miss these nuances, but you perceive the carefully layered strategies at work. Candles and lanterns create pools of light and shadow, isolating faces and gestures, emphasizing some while concealing others. Every eye contact, every half smile, every whisper is amplified in this controlled environment. Courtiers shift subtly, learning which interactions are rewarded and which draw scrutiny. You notice how a slight lean, a shared laugh, or a moment of hesitation can ripple through the chamber, altering alliances and influence. Scholars still argue whether these patterns were codified etiquette or emergent behaviors refined through observation and necessity. By the time you step back, the complexity of the chamber strikes you. It is not merely a private space, but a carefully crafted instrument of political and sexual power. The combination of architecture, light, color, sound, and movement orchestrates behavior, perception, and loyalty. You feel that every glance, every whisper, every gesture is part of a living, breathing system designed to control, reward, and manipulate those within it. Where survival requires as much awareness as courage, and influence is wielded as skillfully as any sword or decree. You follow the whispers down a labyrinthine corridor lined with carved wooden panels, each depicting past rulers and mythic heroes, their stories immortalized in gilded detail. The flickering torchlight throws shadows that dance like conspirators on the walls, and you sense that every step here carries weight. Scholars still argue whether these corridors were designed merely for grandeur or intentionally to evoke awe, submission, and attentiveness. The air is tinged with a mixture of salt from nearby baths and the faint scent of perfumed oils, creating a subtle, intoxicating atmosphere that heightens awareness and senses. A distant melody reaches you, faintly played on a pair of delicate flutes, their notes curling around corners and into private chambers. Courtiers move silently, their embroidered garments rustling softly, the colors deep indigo, rich russet, vibrant saffron and teal, marking rank, favor, and proximity to the ruler's gaze. You notice how even the smallest gestures, the tilt of a head, a whisper behind a fan, carry immense meaning, a coded language of intimacy and power. The oddest detail strikes you. A small, gilded box set atop a pedestal, rumored to contain tokens of favor or reminders of past transgressions, its presence both alluring and intimidating. In one chamber, you witness a ritualized meeting where favored companions and officials discuss state matters, interwoven with personal entanglements. The ruler reclines on cushions, eyes glinting with amusement and calculation, while attendants hover at just the right distance, poised to intervene or observe. Every movement seems choreographed, a subtle touch on the arm, a playful nudge, a shared laugh that signals approval or mild reprimand. The interplay of sexual and political influence is intricate, with intimacy leveraged as a means to command loyalty and extract information. Scholars still debate whether these encounters were spontaneous or meticulously orchestrated performances. You see that objects in the room are not merely decorative. They are instruments of control. A goblet placed at a certain angle, a fan that masks a gaze, a tapestry partially drawn back. Each element shapes perception and interaction. The environment itself seems to guide behavior, encouraging submission, attentiveness, or flattery, depending on the positioning of figures and objects. Even the soft lighting, which falls in warm amber pools, contrasting with shadowed recesses, manipulates mood and focus, highlighting some faces while concealing others. The participants move with practiced subtlety. Courtiers shift their weight, adjust garments, or lower eyes, all signaling awareness of hierarchy and favor. You notice the careful balance between proximity and distance, intimacy and restraint. Every smile, sigh, or fleeting glance can alter alliances or provoke jealousy. The music and murmurs act as a backdrop, blending with the soft rustle of silk to create an immersive sensory landscape where power, desire, and strategy intertwine. Scholars still argue whether such manipulations were conscious techniques or evolved from centuries of observation and social refinement. As the meeting concludes, you realize the sheer complexity of these interactions. The corridor, the chamber, the arrangement of people and objects, all orchestrate a delicate dance of influence, where political acumen and personal allure intersect. The spaces themselves teach lessons in perception, patience, and subtlety, demanding that you navigate with both wit and caution. Even stepping away, the atmosphere lingers, a reminder that in this world, control is as much about the unseen currents of desire and attention as it is about overt commands or decrees. You step into a smaller, private chamber, its walls lined with intricate mosaics depicting legendary lovers and cunning rulers, each tile shimmering under the glow of golden sconces. The air is thick with the scent of incense, mingling with faint traces of lavender and musk, a calculated blend meant to relax, entice, and subtly disarm. Scholars still argue whether these fragrances were purely aesthetic or intentionally used to influence behavior and decision-making. You notice a low divan in the center, covered in richly embroidered fabrics, its cushions arranged precisely for comfort, yet subtly guiding posture and orientation. Attendants move silently, bringing small trays of fruits, honeyed confections, and spiced wine, offering them in a ritualized manner that conveys hierarchy and expectation. The oddest detail catches your eye. a small mirror angled just so, allowing the ruler to watch visitors. Expressions while appearing distracted or contemplative. This interplay of observation and concealment creates a subtle tension, a psychological dance where every micro-expression is scrutinized. You realize that even casual gestures, lifting a cup, brushing a lock of hair behind an ear, carry layers of meaning, communicating consent, favor, or disapproval. The ruler reclines languidly, eyes glinting with amusement and authority, as favored companions sit nearby, some close enough to feel a gentle brush of fabric, others strategically placed to maintain an aura of intrigue. Conversations flow like a current, weaving personal compliments, veiled warnings, and subtle queries into a tapestry of influence. You notice how laughter is timed, how a hand resting lightly on a cushion can signal approval, and how a shift in gaze redirects attention, shaping alliances with almost imperceptible cues. Scholars still debate whether these orchestrations were formalized strategies or organic evolutions of courtly etiquette. Objects in the room seem to pulse with significance. A jeweled goblet placed at the edge of the divan, a curtain partially drawn to reveal glimpses of gilded wall panels, and a carved wooden screen that controls lines of sight. All act as instruments of subtle control. Every element is both decoration and communication, guiding behavior and directing focus, demonstrating that power in this environment extends beyond words into the very fabric of space and material. The combination of light, scent, and spatial arrangement creates an immersive psychological environment where attention and desire are constantly negotiated. You witness a small game played among the companions, a ritualized exchange of favors and secrets, veiled in flirtation and humor. Each movement, smile, and whispered phrase carries dual significance, pleasure intertwined with political leverage. A brush of a hand or tilt of a head may confirm loyalty or reveal hesitation, and the ruler watches with keen interest, reinforcing the delicate balance of influence. The oddest detail emerges again, a gilded token passed subtly, a symbolic gesture with meaning only for those attuned to the nuances of courtly intrigue. Scholars still argue whether such objects were mere symbols of intimacy or powerful tools for ensuring obedience. As you exit, the chamber's atmosphere lingers, sensory, charged, and layered. You realize that these intimate spaces are arenas of power, where personal and political influence converge in a choreography of gestures, gazes, and whispers. The architecture, objects, scents, and light all collaborate to teach lessons in subtlety, manipulation, and perception, leaving you both fascinated and slightly disoriented. In this world, control is not imposed by force alone. It thrives in the spaces between desire and decorum, in every carefully calibrated glance, gesture, and pause. You now find yourself on the bustling streets outside the palace, where courtiers and merchants intermingle beneath colorful banners fluttering in the breeze. The city hums with energy. Children dart between market stalls, the scent of roasted nuts and spiced wine wafting from vendor carts, while musicians tune their lyres and flutes in preparation for a performance that will soon begin. Scholars still argue whether public displays of flirtation and spectacle were genuine leisure or subtle reinforcement of political hierarchies. You notice the oddest detail, a troupe of acrobats whose movements mimic courtly gestures, reflecting the intimate power plays you've just observed indoors. Nearby, a group of city guards in indigo and russet tunics keep a watchful eye, their polished metal glinting in the sunlight. They seem both protective and performative, reinforcing the social order with their presence. You wander past a fountain where noblewomen toss coins and whisper to one another, their laughter carrying hints of secrets, alliances, and subtle rivalries. Every glance exchanged between strangers holds the potential for influence, and even casual smiles might carry political weight. The streets themselves act as an extension of the palace, a stage where observation and maneuvering are constant. The merchant stalls are a riot of color: saffron-dyed fabrics, teal-painted ceramics, and glimmering gold trinkets catching the sun at odd angles. One peculiar vendor catches your attention: a woman selling small mirrors and perfumes, products historically linked to seduction and social manipulation. Her wares are positioned not merely for profit, but as instruments of influence, tools used by visitors to negotiate favor or charm. Scholars still argue whether such trades were widespread instruments of political strategy or isolated curiosities. But the effect on your senses is unmistakable. As you navigate deeper into the maze of streets, you notice private courtyards hidden behind high walls, glimpses of gardens filled with vibrant blooms, small fountains trickling into mosaic basins, and intimate seating arrangements for whispered conversations. Here, as in the palace, power is exercised in subtle, often eroticized ways, encoded in posture, scent, and ritual. A passerby brushing past you seems innocuous at first, but a fleeting glance reveals carefully maintained attention and social calibration, the very essence of influence played out in the mundane. Children, surprisingly, mimic these adult dynamics in their games, creating miniature dramas that mirror larger societal structures. A boy tosses a coin at a friend, who responds with an exaggerated bow, both aware of the performative exchange, echoing the adult courts you've just left. Even laughter is calibrated, a signal of alliances and enmity alike. The streets, alive with energy and color, serve as both theater and training ground for social negotiation, where every sensory detail, the scent of herbs, the rustle of silk, the chime of a distant bell, becomes a tool or message in the ongoing game of influence. By the time you reach the harbor, the sun is low, casting long gilded shadows across ships moored for trade. Sailors practice their routines, and the rhythmic creak of rigging adds a percussive backdrop to the city's pulse. Even here, interactions carry subtle layers of power. Eye contact, hand gestures, and proximity convey messages of status and intent. Scholars still debate whether these maritime spaces were consciously curated as extensions of courtly influence, but the patterns are clear, and the lessons of subtlety, observation, and strategic allure echo from palace chambers to public thoroughfares. You step back from the harbor, taking in the city as a living network of influence, where power is not merely enforced, but embedded in every gesture, glance, and interaction. The intricate dance of authority, desire, and observation pervades all spaces, private and public, leaving you aware that control in this world thrives not just on edicts or wealth, but on the nuanced interplay of human connection, perception, and social calibration. You find yourself entering a quiet inner courtyard as dusk begins to settle, the last amber rays glinting off polished stone and mosaic tiles. The air is scented with jasmine and burning incense, drifting from small braziers carefully placed along the edges. Scholars still argue whether these aromatics were merely for ambiance or a subtle psychological tool, influencing mood and perception in ways that reinforced power hierarchies. You notice an odd, slightly unsettling detail. Dot, dot, dot. A lattice screen with shadows dancing across it, concealing figures engaged in hushed conversation and deliberate gestures that hint at manipulation, persuasion, and covert courtly games. In one corner, a pair of young acolytes arrange cushions in a careful, symmetrical pattern, their movements almost ritualistic, while nearby, a noble woman in teal and saffron robes adjusts a delicate fan, fanning herself with exaggerated gestures that draw attention from onlookers and potential allies alike. You wander closer, observing the careful choreography of proximity, eye contact, and subtle touch. Even casual brushes of hands carry meaning, calibrated to assert influence or test loyalty. The courtyard itself seems alive, a stage where intention, attraction, and strategy are enacted simultaneously. Nearby, a fountain gurgles softly, its waters catching the dying light and reflecting gold and crimson hues onto surrounding walls. This small oasis becomes a meeting point for whispered negotiation. Gifts exchanged discreetly, and alliances formed in silence. You see a young courtier holding a small mirror, catching the reflection of a visiting dignitary and angling it just so, demonstrating a mastery of optics, perception, and subtle seduction as tools for control. Oddly, a bird perched on the fountain edge appears to mimic human movements, adding a surreal echo to the deliberate human interactions around you. As you trace the periphery of the courtyard, you encounter a series of alcoves where statues and reliefs depict mythological scenes of desire, conquest, and cunning. Each piece seems carefully placed to remind visitors of the historical precedent for using intimacy and attraction as political tools. Scholars still debate whether such imagery was meant for education, intimidation, or the reinforcement of social norms, but the effect is undeniably immersive. The juxtaposition of human activity against these sculpted narratives reinforces the omnipresence of influence and control in every corner. Candles flicker along the edges of the courtyard, casting elongated, playful shadows that turn every gesture into a form of performance. You notice a peculiar detail. A servant balances a tray of sweetmeats while subtly leaning into the space between two nobles, a small act that could sway favor or spark suspicion. Even the placement of objects, a delicately carved chair, a cup of perfumed water, a silk scarf, becomes an extension of political strategy. Every motion, glance, and scent is calibrated to convey intention, test boundaries, and consolidate subtle power. The courtyard, though serene, hums with unspoken tension and layered interaction. You feel the delicate interplay of dominance and submission, allure and caution, knowledge and secrecy. A passing breeze stirs the incense, mingling with the scent of flowers and the faint salt from the nearby harbor, creating a sensory tapestry that underscores the psychological complexity of these ancient strategies. Every detail reinforces that control in this world is wielded not just through overt command, but through observation, subtle influence, and the carefully orchestrated dance of human connection. As night falls, lanterns are lit, casting golden pools of light on cobblestones and mosaic patterns, illuminating the faces of courtiers in warm, hypnotic tones. The courtyard becomes a theater of perception, strategy, and subtle seduction, a microcosm where the lessons of political intimacy are enacted with precision. The air is thick with anticipation, a blend of scent, movement, and intention that teaches you how deeply politics and personal allure were entwined in these civilizations. You step into a dimly lit chamber, walls draped with richly embroidered tapestries depicting scenes of conquest, courtly love, and divine judgment. Each stitch a silent testament to authority and power. The air smells faintly of beeswax and rosewater, an odd but deliberate layering of scents meant to soften the senses and subtly influence perception. Scholars still argue whether these sensory strategies were intentionally psychological or simply decorative. Either way, you feel the room's influence pressing in, guiding attention and shaping reactions. In the center, a long, velvet-covered table holds an assortment of delicate objects, jeweled combs, gilded mirrors, and small ornate boxes, each containing symbolic or practical items used in the intimate arenas of politics. You notice a peculiar detail, a miniature bronze figurine, positioned so its gaze aligns with visitors' eyes, almost daring them to consider their own behavior and alliances. Courtiers in indigo and russet robes move about quietly, exchanging whispers, adjusting fabrics, and leaning subtly to convey messages through posture and proximity alone. Even a casual touch seems charged, as if every interaction carries layered intent. A young scribe hunches over a parchment, noting not only events, but nuances. Who looked where, who gestured subtly, who lingered near whom. This meticulous recording is both a historical log and a form of surveillance, capturing evidence of influence and power in real time. You wander past, observing how these tiny gestures, tilted heads, adjusted fans, deliberate glances, function as currency in the political economy of desire. The chamber seems to breathe with these subtle exchanges, alive with tension and anticipation. Along one wall, a series of small alcoves house glass vessels filled with exotic oils and perfumes. Their scents are mixed carefully, each chosen to evoke calm, arousal, or focus depending on the visitor's status or role. A courtier dips a fingertip into amber oil, brushing it across their own wrist and then passing close enough to another to leave an almost imperceptible trace. Oddly, a cat slinks silently across the room, its movements mirroring the delicate choreography of the humans, adding a surreal echo of stealth and intention. You notice another detail, a pair of decorative mirrors angled against each other, reflecting multiple perspectives of the room simultaneously, ensuring that every gesture, expression, and interaction is visible from more than one vantage. Scholars debate whether these optical arrangements were practical tools for observation or elaborate psychological games, but their effect is undeniable. They amplify tension, encourage self-awareness, and magnify the subtle politics of attention and favor. At the far end, a raised platform holds two thrones draped in deep crimson velvet, gilded with motifs of lions and eagles. Courtiers approach cautiously, understanding that proximity to power comes with risk. A wrong move, a poorly timed gesture, and social standing could be jeopardized. You wander along the perimeter, noticing how floor patterns and lighting guide movement, subtly channeling behavior and interactions toward intended outcomes. The interplay of shadows and lantern light transforms each figure into both observer and participant, caught in a silent performance of influence and desire. As you linger, the chamber reveals its lessons. Control is exercised not just through command or decree, but through the orchestration of space, scent, touch, and perception. Even the smallest action, a brush of the hand, a whispered word, a tilt of the head, carries meaning. The room teaches that in these ancient courts, mastery over intimacy, attention, and subtle influence could consolidate power as effectively as armies or laws. Every object, every gesture, every flicker of candlelight becomes a tool in the intricate dance of political seduction. You find yourself on the palace balconies at sunset, the sky bleeding shades of amber and violet over marble terraces that overlook bustling courtyards below. The air is thick with the mingled aromas of incense, spiced wine, and the faint tang of the sea drifting in from distant harbors. Scholars still argue whether the strategic positioning of these terraces was primarily for leisure, surveillance, or subtle displays of dominance. But as you move along the balustrade, it feels like every shadowed corner is part of a calculated choreography. A procession of courtiers glides along the stone pathways, each step deliberate, their robes catching the dying light in glimmers of indigo, russet, and gold. You notice the meticulous attention to how bodies are oriented, heads slightly tilted, hands brushing against ornate railings, fans fluttering in precise rhythms, an unspoken language of influence and attention. Even the laughter of a passing servant seems measured, designed to punctuate moments of observation without drawing overt notice. In the center of a small courtyard below, an intimate circle gathers around a low fountain. The water sparkles with gilded accents, and as it ripples, it mirrors the expressions of those watching. A young noblewoman adjusts a veil so that only a portion of her face is visible, revealing enough to invite curiosity, but withholding full comprehension. Nearby, a man in teal and saffron gestures subtly with his fan, signaling both alliance and intrigue, a tiny performance charged with social consequence. On the terraces, you notice alcoves adorned with mirrors angled to catch multiple viewpoints, reflecting faces and postures in ways that amplify subtle signals of favor or warning. Small glass vessels of scented oils are passed between hands, their fragrances deliberately layered to evoke calm, seduction, or tension as required. An unusual but deliberate detail catches your eye. A silver pendant glinting in the fading light, not just ornamental, but likely a discreet symbol of rank, loyalty, or secret pact. The architecture itself participates in this intricate dance. Arched corridors, carved balustrades, and elevated stairways guide movement, ensuring that paths intersect at points of maximum visibility, making the art of observation a continuous performance. As you wander, you realize that even the act of standing still, choosing which shadow to linger in, carries meaning. Every gaze, every flutter of a sleeve, every subtle tilt of the head communicates in this silent, charged dialect of influence. A musician tucked into a corner softly plucks a lyre, the gentle notes weaving through the courtyard and terraces, influencing mood, encouraging attentiveness, and masking whispers that might otherwise be overheard. Scholars debate whether these soundscapes were crafted intentionally or emerged organically. But you sense their impact. Tension, desire, and power are all heightened by this background rhythm. As the sun dips below the horizon, lanterns are lit along the walkways, casting warm pools of light and deep shadows that animate every figure. The glow highlights the faces of courtiers, while leaving certain corners deliberately obscured, creating a visual hierarchy of observation. You notice a servant passing a folded note to a leaning nobleman, a gesture that seems trivial, but carries immense political weight. Control here is exercised through environment, movement, and perception. A masterclass in subtle authority and strategic intimacy. By the time twilight deepens into night, you realize that every stone, every reflection, every flicker of firelight is a tool in the orchestration of influence, where power, desire, and observation intertwine seamlessly. Even a casual visitor like you becomes part of the narrative, drawn into the rhythms and signals that govern this delicate and dangerous game. The following morning, you find yourself in the private chambers where scrolls, perfumes, and ceremonial garments mingle in fragrant disarray. Scholars still argue whether these chambers were purely for leisure or carefully engineered stages for political maneuvering. But as you step closer, you see the intricate patterns on tapestries depicting mythic unions, battles, and courtly rituals. The imagery isn't just decorative, it serves as constant reminders of power, lineage, and the expectations of those who occupy the space. A figure in saffron robes leans against a carved marble console, adjusting the position of delicate mirrors that reflect both light and presence in precise ways. You notice the faint scent of rosewater mingling with amber, curling in the air, a sensory cue that signals both alertness and intimacy. A handmaid glides across the room, placing folded garments near the windows to catch the sun's early glow, a detail so minor, yet profoundly symbolic of rank, propriety, and attention to ceremonial timing. Nearby, a low table holds polished bronze vessels filled with spiced wine and honeyed delicacies. As you move closer, a subtle game unfolds. Cups are offered, received, or declined in precise rhythms that convey consent, interest, or subtle power shifts. You notice one nobleman deliberately offering a cup with a hand that brushes the wrist of the recipient ever so lightly, a gesture loaded with layered meaning and consequence. Scholars debate whether such tactile communication was standardized or improvised, but it feels undeniably intentional. In one corner, a collection of small, intricately carved figurines captures your attention. Each represents a political ally, a rival, or a symbol of loyalty, placed so that the arrangement conveys an invisible map of influence across the chamber. You sense that even a visitor's attention to these objects could be measured, their glance read as either clever insight or dangerous overreach. A musician quietly plucks strings from a lyre, punctuating moments of silence with gentle resonance. The sound subtly modulates the mood, elevating tension or softening interactions, guiding the delicate dance of attention, flirtation, and privacy, and observation. The rhythm of the music seems to dictate how gestures, expressions, and glances are timed, transforming simple movement into a performative act of strategy. Lanterns are lit along carved consoles and hanging sconces, casting pools of worn amber light that flicker across gilded surfaces, mirrors, and intricate mosaics. Shadows lengthen and shift, emphasizing certain features while obscuring others, allowing courtiers to signal or conceal intentions. You notice the careful placement of cushions, low stools, and even small pedestals, all designed to manipulate posture, proximity, and access in ways that reinforce hierarchical order and control over interactions. As the morning progresses, the chamber hums with quiet energy. Whispers, subtle gestures, and carefully orchestrated pauses dominate communication. Even a seemingly casual laugh or tilt of the head carries political weight, while the placement of a foot or the touch of a sleeve becomes part of a broader system of influence. Here, sexuality, observation, and ceremony converge, turning ordinary interactions into tools of control, subtly shaping loyalty, allegiance, and desire. By mid-morning, you realize that every object, every glance, and every gesture within these chambers is part of an unspoken system. The architecture, decor, and even light itself function as instruments in the orchestration of influence, illustrating how deeply power and intimacy are intertwined in these ancient civilizations. You wander into a lush courtyard, the kind that seems almost too perfect to be accidental. Scholars still argue whether these gardens were designed for private reflection, public display, or subtle seduction. But as you step along the mosaic paths, the scent of jasmine and orange blossom wraps around you like an invisible embrace. Fountains ripple softly, and the water's rhythm mirrors the gentle pacing of courtiers who move with deliberate grace, their gestures calculated to impress or unsettle. A group of attendants arranges flowering garlands over low trellises, their hands brushing each other in fleeting, almost imperceptible touches. You notice a pattern. Some flowers are positioned to catch the sunlight in ways that highlight the eyes or hands of specific nobles, turning natural beauty into a stage for observation and influence. Scholars debate whether these arrangements were symbolic or purely aesthetic, but the effect is undeniable. Every glance carries weight. Along the edges of the courtyard, marble benches and carved stone tables are dotted with small bowls of fruit, nuts, and spiced wine. Each offering seems casual, yet you sense the ritual behind them. Accepting a piece of fruit or refusing it conveys loyalty, consent, or subtle challenge. A young scribe crouches nearby, sketching fleeting interactions, perhaps to record behavior for political leverage, or maybe as a quiet, personal record of intrigue. Sunlight filters through trellises and arches, casting a lattice of shadows across the stone floor. You notice how these shadows accentuate certain features: the tilt of a head, the curve of a smile, the gesture of a hand, and obscure others, giving some interactions a private quality while exposing others to the observant. It's as if the light itself participates in the politics of intimacy. Near the central fountain, a noble woman adjusts her robes to reveal just enough ornamentation, gold embroidery, jewel-encrusted clasps, to signal wealth, status, and availability for political negotiation without overstepping boundaries. A companion approaches with a small, gilded mirror, and the reflection amplifies the subtle power play. Body language, expression, and positioning become tools of persuasion. Scholars still argue whether such displays were primarily symbolic or actively manipulative, but the nuance is clear. A musician tunes a lyre nearby, the notes drifting over the garden in a delicate, hypnotic pattern. Even without words, the music influences posture, eye contact, and rhythm of conversation, subtly encouraging alliances or intimidation. A butterfly flits near the fountain, drawing your attention to the transient, almost performative nature of each encounter. Every gesture, every look, every interaction is fleeting yet loaded with consequence. By afternoon, the courtyard feels alive with invisible currents. Courtiers, attendants, and visitors navigate layers of observation and influence. Where a fleeting touch, a shared laugh, or a deliberate avoidance can alter political landscapes, the combination of architecture, flora, light, and human behavior creates an environment where control, desire, and allegiance intertwine seamlessly. revealing the ancient art of wielding intimacy as power. You follow a narrow hallway lined with frescoes, each depicting mythological scenes of gods and mortals entangled in acts of seduction, betrayal, or cunning. The images serve as both decoration and subtle instruction, showing how desire could be manipulated for advantage. Scholars still argue whether these frescoes were meant primarily as moral caution or as templates for strategic intimacy, but you can't ignore the meticulous detail. The angle of a glance, the tilt of a head, the entwining of fingers, all are carefully captured. Torches flicker along the walls, their light dancing across the painted figures, and for a moment, the mythological and the living seem to overlap. You hear quiet footsteps echoing in the corridor, and a hand brushes past yours, lingering just long enough to communicate interest, approval, or warning. Even the smallest touch carries political weight. A servant bearing a tray of scented oils pauses, letting your eyes follow the pattern of interaction between a young noble and an older advisor, a silent negotiation of trust, loyalty, and influence unfolding before you. You step into a chamber with a low ceiling, where silk drapes and embroidered cushions create an intimate space. The air is heavy with incense, and the soft glow of candles reflects off golden accents, producing a warm halo around each figure. Here, rituals of control unfold subtly. A shared drink, the exchange of rings, or the strategic positioning of bodies within the space. Scholars debate whether these rituals were formalized or improvised, but the choreography of proximity, gesture, and expression is unmistakable. At the center, a powerful ruler reclines on a raised divan, surrounded by courtiers and companions. You notice the way each guest's posture shifts as they enter. The bow of a head, the alignment of shoulders, the way hands rest on knees, all cues indicating submission, confidence, or hidden dissent. Even a seemingly casual smile or a deliberate pause carries layers of meaning. Nearby, a musician strums a harp, the melody subtly influencing rhythm and mood, reinforcing authority and compliance. The chamber is punctuated with objects of allure and symbolism, jeweled goblets, ornate fans, and intricately carved boxes containing perfumes or tokens. Each item is a potential instrument of persuasion or leverage, meant to signal status, favor, or intent. You observe a minor noble offering a delicate glass vial to the ruler, a gesture that is at once respectful, flattering, and politically loaded. Scholars still argue whether such exchanges were acts of genuine intimacy or calculated moves in the game of power, but the tension is palpable. As you move closer to a curtained alcove, the soft murmur of conversation reveals whispered confidences and subtle threats. A hand slides into another's under the pretense of adjusting a sleeve, a gesture that conveys secret allegiance or silent warning. Even the furniture, arranged for maximum observation and minimal privacy, plays its part in maintaining control over who sees, who knows, and who influences. The room is a masterclass in the manipulation of proximity, appearance, and subtle touch, where every detail is part of the silent art of governance through intimacy. By the end of your passage, you realize the environment itself, the lighting, layout, decor, and human choreography, is as much a tool of control as any decree or sword. Every glance, whisper, and gesture contributes to a complex web of power, seduction, and compliance, where understanding the unspoken rules is as critical as any formal law. You are led into a courtyard bathed in late afternoon light, where mosaics underfoot depict the exploits of legendary rulers and their strategic alliances, often entwined with amorous undertones. The open air changes the dynamics. Gestures become more pronounced, voices carry farther, and even the placement of a step can signal dominance or submission. Scholars still argue whether these public displays were genuine exercises of power or carefully staged spectacles designed to reinforce social hierarchies. But you can feel the tension in the air as you walk among courtiers and guards. Fountains bubble nearby, their gentle sounds masking hushed conversations about favors, intrigues, and unspoken deals. You notice a young noblewoman passing a folded note into the hands of an elder advisor, her eyes flicking toward the throne in a calculated move to convey loyalty while hiding her ambition. Nearby, a servant adjusts a tent flap, ensuring privacy for a discussion that appears casual but is laced with strategic intent. Even the arrangement of flowers, positioned to block sightlines or highlight a favored guest, seems purposeful. You observe a game of skill played by several aristocrats, with dice and tokens. What looks like amusement is layered with negotiation. Wagers are tied to influence, alliances, or future privileges. Every laugh, sigh, and tilt of the head becomes a potential signal. You lean against a marble column, noting how a simple touch on the shoulder or a fleeting brush of a hand conveys coded messages that the untrained eye might miss. Scholars debate how much of these gestures were ritualized versus spontaneous, but the effect on power dynamics is undeniable. As the sun begins to set, lanterns are lit, casting warm amber and deep violet shadows across the courtyard. You see a ruler reclining against a velvet cushion, observing interactions carefully, weighing loyalty, temptation, and leverage. A musician strikes a soft chord, prompting a dance of glances and sidelong smiles. Even a fleeting glance between two nobles can shift alliances, and the subtle distribution of favors becomes a theater of authority, desire, and strategy. Near the edge of the courtyard, a narrow staircase leads to a balcony where more intimate discussions take place. You catch glimpses of whispered secrets, exchanged rings, and careful hand placements, all designed to solidify bonds or assert influence without overt confrontation. The architecture itself supports control: raised platforms, enclosed alcoves, and sightlines carefully calculated to allow observation while preserving the illusion of privacy. As night falls, torches are lit along the perimeter, and the courtyard transforms into a space of both illumination and concealment. Shadows dance across stone walls, highlighting gestures, whispers, and fleeting touches that carry profound political weight. You realize that every element, the light, the architecture, the music, and even the movement of air, works together to maintain a delicate balance of power, persuasion, and strategic intimacy. The evening deepens, and you find yourself in a private chamber, walls draped with rich tapestries, depicting mythic battles and heroic exploits, intertwined with subtle, erotic imagery. The room smells faintly of incense and burning oils, a combination meant to calm nerves while sharpening attention. A sensory reminder that pleasure and power often walk hand in hand. Scholars still argue whether such settings were primarily for seduction or served as tactical spaces for negotiation. But you can't deny the charged atmosphere. A flickering candle illuminates a table scattered with scrolls, goblets, and small tokens of status. Rings, medallions, and embroidered cloths that signal favor or allegiance. You watch as an advisor offers counsel while maintaining careful physical distance, hands barely brushing a garment or a hair strand to reinforce trust without overt intrusion. Every gesture seems measured, a performance where even laughter or sighs could signal consent, dissent, or intent. In the corner, a small group of courtiers engages in a subtle game of riddles and poetry, each line carrying double meanings, coded lessons in loyalty, preference, or romantic interest. You notice how a compliment is layered with suggestion, how a cleverly phrased question can expose secrets, and how the exchange of tokens reinforces hierarchies. Even the choice of seating, near the fire, under the window, or on a raised platform, becomes a statement of status, influence, and strategy. A musician begins to play a lute, filling the space with soft harmonies that seem to echo off the tapestries and stone, creating an intimate cocoon for conversation and negotiation. You see a noblewoman gently brushing dust from a robe, a simple act charged with both ritual and attention to detail, meant to demonstrate care, awareness, and subtle power. Scholars debate whether such small interactions had tangible political impact or existed more as theater, but the reactions of those involved suggest a deep understanding of influence. The chamber's lighting is carefully arranged to create zones of intimacy and observation. Shadows gather in corners, allowing discreet glances and unnoticed movements, while brighter areas draw attention to favored individuals. You witness an exchange of favors, a folded note, a whispered instruction, a shared drink, each action carefully orchestrated to manipulate perceptions and establish authority. Even body language becomes a currency. The tilt of a chin, the placement of a hand, or the angle of a gaze communicates loyalty, desire, or negotiation strategy. As the night progresses, the interplay between intimacy, desire, and political maneuvering intensifies. You notice that even those who appear most passive are keenly aware of opportunities to gain advantage, using charm, timing, and the power of suggestion. The room becomes a theater of strategy, where every laugh, pause, or whispered phrase is both pleasure and power. And you feel the subtle tension in the air, a reminder that control often hides behind the guise of leisure. The night edges toward its quietest hour, and you are drawn into a hidden gallery within the palace. Walls lined with mirrors, intricate frescoes, and small alcoves containing statues that depict both gods and mortals in moments of passion and authority. The air carries a subtle sweetness from crushed petals scattered along the floor, a scent meant to relax, entice, and focus attention simultaneously. Scholars still argue whether these spaces were private sanctuaries or intentional stages of influence, but you sense a deliberate choreography in every detail. Candles flicker across gilded surfaces, casting dancing shadows that animate the room with stories of desire and control. A monarch reclines on a chaise draped with rich fabrics, engaging with a favored companion, each gesture a carefully weighed demonstration of power, approval, or strategic alignment. You notice how small touches, a hand on a shoulder, a whisper near the ear, carry political weight, signaling trust or expectation, consent or command. Even the simplest actions are laden with meaning. Nearby, a scribe records events not with words alone, but with symbolic marks, gestures that encode relationships, favors, and obligations. You see the subtle interplay between audience and performer, where every action is observed and interpreted. Courtiers move like dancers, maintaining proximity while preserving distance, offering conversation or glances that could bind loyalty or reveal vulnerability. Scholars debate the extent to which these intimate interactions shaped broader decisions, but the layers of subtle communication suggest a sophisticated understanding of human behavior. A soft harp begins to play, its sound echoing through the mirrored chamber, amplifying tension and intimacy in equal measure. You watch as the monarch offers gifts, rings, tokens, embroidered cloths, not just as material wealth, but as tangible symbols of influence and favor. The reactions of those receiving them, from a brief bow to a lingering touch, communicate allegiance, desire, or aspiration. Each exchange is a lesson in strategy, cloaked in pleasure, and every smile or sigh carries double meanings. As the night deepens, the chamber becomes a nexus where pleasure, persuasion, and politics intertwine. You notice the careful orchestration of seating, lighting, and movement, all designed to create opportunities for observation, influence, and subtle negotiation. Even laughter and idle chatter are instruments, carrying messages to those attuned to nuance. You realize that in these private spaces, control is exercised not by force, but through mastery of perception, allure, and timing. The final hours see a gradual softening of the atmosphere. Flickering lights, the room quiets now, and you drift through memory and imagination alike, feeling the echoes of candlelight flicker gently across your senses. The air carries the faint, lingering fragrance of petals, a soft perfume that mingles with the warmth of the chambers and the distant sound of the night beyond. Shadows stretch slowly across the walls, blending with gilded details and fading whispers of the past, as though the palace itself exhales and allows you a moment of rest. You feel the intimacy of those moments, the careful choreography of influence and desire, but now distilled into calm understanding rather than tension. Each gesture, each glance, and each subtle negotiation of power settles softly into your mind, like the turning of pages in a book you cannot put down. You wander through imagined corridors lined with flickering torches, gentle music echoing faintly, and the subtle weight of history wrapping you in a gentle embrace. Outside, the night deepens, stars glimmering through a high window, casting silvery patterns across stone floors. The soft rustle of distant leaves and the whisper of wind remind you that even the most private, orchestrated spaces existed within a world moving quietly beyond. Your thoughts drift, guided by the rhythm of breath, the warmth, and as the final whispers of the night cradle you, remember, these tales, steeped in strategy, intimacy, and the quiet art of influence, have left a soft mark on your imagination. Ready to rest, drift, and dream. End of script. Sweet dreams.